Thank you for applying for your Professional Technologist designation with ASSET. The following short webinar will demonstrate how to complete your work experience spreadsheet. A Professional Technologist or PTech is registered to practice engineering or geoscience in Alberta within a scope of practice defined by the ASSET-APEGA Joint Board of Examiners. A defined scope of practice is a written description of the individual's specific area of professional expertise. It defines the limitations within which a PTech Eng or PTech Geo is permitted to practice engineering or geoscience respectively. As part of the requirements for registration as a professional technologist, you must have a minimum of 6 years of experience in areas that relate to engineering or geoscience that is acceptable to the ASSET-APEGA Joint Board of Examiners. Depending on the nature of your experience, you may need more than the minimum of 6 years to demonstrate sufficient engineering or geoscience experience. Within the minimum of 6 years of experience, you must also demonstrate at least 2 years, which are in your proposed scope of practice and were completed under the supervision and control of a PEng or PGO member of APEGA. This is a mandatory requirement set out in the Professional Technologist Regulation. Supervision is not restricted to your immediate supervisor. Rather, a PEng or PGO must have taken responsibility for your work for at least a 2-year period. Please note that if your academic program area of study does not match your proposed scope of practice, you are required to demonstrate at least 10 years of work experience within your scope of practice. An applicant's work experience is demonstrated via the PTech Experience Spreadsheet. This is the tool used by the ASSET-APEGA Joint Board of Examiners to evaluate whether you have sufficiently demonstrated engineering or geoscience-related work experience. No other resume or CV format will be accepted as part of your application for PTech. To demonstrate your experience, you will need to complete the scope, scope activities, and summary pages of the spreadsheet. Use the tabs at the bottom of the spreadsheet to navigate between pages. You may also want to save a copy of your completed spreadsheet for your records, as you may need to update your information for a future review. A sample reference page is included for your information. Please do not complete this page, as the reference form will be sent directly to your references by ASSET. The ASSET Code of Ethics is also included in the spreadsheet for your information. The purpose of the scope page is to prepare your proposed scope of practice. Complete all non-shaded areas on this page. First, enter your name, the date, and your ASSET ID number. Next, select your discipline from the drop-down menu. You will also need to select your field of practice from the drop-down menu provided. If not listed, you may select Other and describe your field of practice. However, do not use the terms engineering or geoscience to describe this field. The information on discipline and field of practice assists with preparation of your proposed scope of practice and determines the subject matter experts to which review of your application will be assigned. Next, scroll down on the scope page to enter your scope activities. Scope activities are engineering or geoscience tasks that make up your proposed scope of practice. You may have multiple scope activities, but you must have a PEng or PGO reference to validate each activity for at least a 2-year period. The scope activities you enter will be automatically listed at the top of the scope page to assist with completing your proposed scope of practice. To enter your scope activities, first select an engineering or geoscience task from the drop-down menu for each scope activity. These engineering and geoscience tasks are taken from the approved definitions of engineering and geoscience in the Engineering and Geoscience Professions Act. Next, describe the structure, work, or process you performed for each engineering or geoscience task. Numerical limitations such as voltage levels, pressure, building size, and so forth should be included if applicable. The scope activity must also require the professional application of math, chemistry, physics, or a related applied subject. To be included in your scope of practice, the scope activity must be supported by a PEng or PGO reference from APEGA for at least a 2-year period. Using the information now listed at the top of the scope page, draft your proposed scope of practice in the space provided. The required format for your proposed scope of practice is as follows. Within the discipline of, enter your discipline, and field of practice of, enter your field of practice. List your scope activities, that is the routine application of industry-recognized codes, standards, procedures, and practices using established engineering or applied science principles and methods of problem solving. The recommended word count for your proposed scope of practice is a maximum of 50 to 80 words. Next, move to the Scope Activities pages to provide more detail about your scope activities. You do not need to re-enter your name, date, asset ID number, or scope activities here, as this information is auto-populated from the Scope page. List each company for which you performed the scope activity, including the organization name and the start and end dates of employment. Remember that each scope activity must be supported by a PEng or PGO member of APEGA who took responsibility for your work for at least a 2-year period. The total number of months of experience will be calculated automatically based on the start and end dates. Under Details of Engineering or Geoscience Work Performed, describe each scope activity in more detail, focusing on the technical engineering or geoscience aspects of your work. Job duties such as management, reviewing, supervision, cost estimating, project management, and so forth should not be entered here. Instead, describe how you use engineering or geoscience theory and calculations to perform the scope activity. For example, for design, what steps did you take in the design process? What theory and calculations did you use? And what codes and standards did you use? Please use the first person in all of your descriptions. For example, say, I designed. Abbreviations and acronyms must be defined or explained, as these may be organization specific. In addition, the description must fit in the space provided. If you need to use multiple lines in one field, use Alt plus Enter to start a new line within a cell. Please do not send any drawings, specifications, reports, projects, or photos to accompany your application, as these will not be used in the review process. Finally, move to the Summary page to list your references and describe a minimum of 6 years of engineering or geoscience-related work experience. You do not need to re-enter your name, date, or asset ID number, as this information is auto-populated from the Scope page. Enter the information for each of your employers for at least the last 6 years in chronological order with the most recent position first. Include a reference for each place of employment. A minimum of 3 references is required. It is recommended that references you provide, in addition to your PEng or PGO reference, be regulated members of ASSET or APEGA. Please include a non-generic email address for each reference, i.e., not a Yahoo or Hotmail account, or a mailing address if necessary. The summary of engineering or geoscience experience should be a brief description of your primary engineering or geoscience task in that position and must fit in the space provided. Please limit your description to professional level experience. Your work experience spreadsheet will be sent to each reference so that they can comment on the work experience you described in the specific time period that pertains to them. Your references will be contacted directly by ASSET. Please ensure that the information you provide on the summary page matches the scope and scope activities pages in relation to titles, professional designations, and time period. If in doubt, please communicate with your referees. A minimum of 2 discipline-specific subject matter experts conduct a full review of your work experience spreadsheet and the questionnaires returned by your references. The subject matter experts make a recommendation on your application and proposed scope of practice to the ASSET-APEGA Joint Board of Examiners. The Joint Board then discusses your file at an in-person meeting and makes a decision on your file. In accordance with the Engineering and Geoscience Professions Act and related regulations, the Joint Board may approve, defer, or reject your application. If the Joint Board recommends your application for approval with a revised scope, the proposed revisions will be sent to you and your references to determine support for the changes. If your application is deferred, you will receive instructions from the Joint Board as to what deficiencies in your application must be addressed. If your application is rejected, you will receive information regarding appealing the decision. ASSET staff are here to help throughout the application process. If you require further assistance, please contact Amanda Lake, Professional Practice Liaison, at the contact information noted on the screen.